Welcome, everyone, to our final session of the Fall 2023 series of Tuesday Times Roundtable, Safeguarding Democracies and Rebuilding Institutional Trust, a closer look at Latin America, presented by USAID. TTR is the Office of Global Learning Initiative's flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends. You can learn more about TTR, watch past recordings, or come back and reference this one at go.fiu.edu/TTR. If you haven't already, please take a moment to sign in. This QR code on the share screen, and it will maintain through these opening introductions, or through the link in the chat if you want to sign in using your same device, is where you need to be signing in. This sign-in is what will report back to Panther Connect or your professors that asked you to come and invited you, extended that invitation to you. So please, if you haven't already, please take a moment to sign in. My name is Michelle Zaldivar, your program manager here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. A special thank you to our graduate assistants, Natalia and Gitanjali, and joining us today for our newest addition to the team, Assistant Director for Student Programs, Connie Pezhak, who are all monitoring the chat and answering your questions as they come in. Medallion students, remember to take a screenshot of your sign-in for those points. If you'd like to learn more about the opportunities at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, check out our programs at goglobal.fiu.edu/students, or feel free to email us at glmedal@fiu.edu. Also, follow us on social media. Our Instagram is at GoGlobalFIU, or you can use that QR code to pull that up on your phone. TTR always centers on an issue or trend and is always linked to an article where you can learn more. You can read the article for this week's session at go.fiu.edu/TTR1114. That's 1114. FIU provides anyone with an @FIU email address free digital access to the New York Times. So if you haven't already, you can activate your subscription at accessnyt.com. Our session today actually aligns with an upcoming opportunity for you to get more involved with USAID on campus. We're hosting a Model USAID FIU is an opportunity open to all FIU students, and will be featuring panel discussions on emerging issues and in international development, such as aging and artificial intelligence, and will include a case competition for students with a very unique prize for the top students, a trip to USAID's mission headquarters in Barbados. So as long as you invite me, we can come along. I am in. Let's head out to Model USAID. No prior preparation or experience will be required for participants, and free lunches included. You can join the Model USAID event on Thursday, November 16th from 9 to 5 p.m. and SASC 160. Leading our session today is Chantal Agarwal, Democracy Officer for USAID's Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean, or LAC. For over 2 decades, Ms. Agarwal, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. Chantal, help me out. Agarwal.
Oh, you've got it. It's Agarwal.
I got it.
You got it. You got it. No
has
worries.
developed and implemented U.S. government-funded programs in anti-corruption, rule of law, human rights, elections, media freedoms, civil society strengthening, and citizen security in Latin America and the Caribbean and around the world. Prior to working at USAID, Chantal has worked with an international development professional international development professional at DAI Global, the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, and other implementers of USAID programs. Chantal holds an MA in Latin America Studies from the Elliott School for International Affairs of the George Washington University, and a BA in International Affairs from the University of Maryland at College Park. She speaks Spanish, French, and Italian, is the daughter of immigrants, and is a first-generation American, is married to her husband, Eduardo, and happily has 1 child. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. And everyone, please joining in welcoming our speaker, Chantal.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm really excited to be here. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Molly O'Halloran, who is our esteemed liaison with FIU. And I do note that she is our DEIA advisor for LAC and acting division chief for development programming and partnerships. in the office of the Chief DEIA officer. And more importantly, she manages the relationship, as I said, in her role as liaison with FIU for the agency. So I wanted to give her a quick shout out, as I know she's got a busy day. And I just wanted you guys to know that she's here. And I think when I say she's here, I think you're actually in South Florida right now, right?
I head there shortly this evening to be on campus, and I hope to see you all at the Model USAID event on Thursday. And Michelle was not kidding. There's an opportunity to go to Barbados as a result of this. So don't miss that opportunity. I know,
Yes,
Michelle.
yes.
I know, Michelle. We'll find a way to get you there.
Yeah, go for it. I've been there for work and it's an incredible opportunity. So thank you, Molly, for connecting me with this program. I'm really excited to engage with you all. I see that we've got some FIU, Miami, and Washington, D.C. representation on the line. Don't be shy. Feel free to put in the chat, if you still want to, where you're calling in from. Let's see. Um, for this discussion, I'd really love to explore these themes of democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean. I know this is a weird time for everyone around the world right now, actually. Democracy is experiencing challenges. I think that particularly post-pandemic, um, people around the world, families, youth, students, um, you know, even, people who have lived for decades under different kinds of regimes are questioning, is democracy really the type of system that we want to live in? And I really would love to know, I know that many of you are coming from various disciplines and areas of study. And so I'd love to, keeping in the theme of awareness, perspective, and engagement, I'd really love to engage with you over the course of this time we have together over the next hour. So what I'd like to do is first tell you kind of where I'm coming from. So as Michelle mentioned, I work for USAID. I'll tell you a couple things about USAID. I'll then I have a little poll I wanted to do, is just a little experiment and kind of get you guys engaged. Then I have a couple of slides I wanted to share with you that contains information about democracy that we support a project that is implemented by Vanderbilt University called the Americas Barometer, which is a public opinion survey that is implemented over 38 countries and really seeks to understand like citizens' attitudes about democracy, about the rule of law, and I think is a really important starting point for these types of conversations. So, but please, if you have questions at any time, please don't hesitate. This is meant to be an exchange. So this is not very formal. You can interrupt me as I go through the slides. Either feel free to drop a question into the chat or raise your hand and then we can call on you and then just, we can just talk. So yeah. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
So yeah, let me know when you want to launch the poll, but then it's just as an extension of what you were saying. If you'd rather throw your question in the chat, Gitanjali, Natalia, and I will absolutely jump into the conversation and speak that aloud so that everyone can hear it. And we'll engage in that discussion. So like Chantal said, if there's something, even a question that's related to just that slide or that thing that she's saying in that moment, feel free to drop it. Does not have to wait until the end. We'll bring it into the conversation and bring that directly to Chantal for you.
Awesome. So briefly, I work for the United States Agency for International Development. And as many of you know, as part of its U.S. Foreign policy, the United States, like many other countries, provides foreign assistance and specifically international development experience for assistance to our partners, rather, worldwide. And as part of that effort, I sit in Washington, D.C., and part of my role in the Latin America Bureau, we oversee kind of the regional perspective and regional programming. And then we also provide technical assistance to our what we call missions or offices in other countries. And so in the Latin America region, we have 13 missions that we support. And so, of course, I have colleagues here that are experts in environment and water and sanitation and other areas, but in my team and myself, we focus on democracy, human rights, and governance. And so I just let's throw the poll up and see how folks respond. I wanted to ask you how you guys feel about democracy and also what you think, which institution do you think citizens in Latin America trust the most? And even if you're not an expert or work in the Latin America region in general, I know that there are probably folks from all over the globe. Let's see. I see some responses are pouring in. Yeah, so our options for answers are the judiciary, meaning like the courts, the church, police, or the Congress. I put church instead of faith-based institutions since most of the church is very much so an institution in many of the Latin American countries, as you may know. All right.
Yeah.
Wow, lots of responses.
Yes, and so many of our responses to your initial question of having everybody throw where they're from in the chat. And by all means, if you still want to do a shout out, go ahead and do that. At FIU, we have a ton of first generation or the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves that come from all over the world. So even though we're physically here in South Florida, if you want to shout out your heritage, your parents' heritage, or where in that, especially if you're from the region, you align with, definitely still drop that in the chat. We're at 72% of participation.
Okay, I think that's a good figure. That's a good
Yeah.
figure. And it looks like folks, the prevailing opinion is that the church, that folks in Latin America trust most the church. And that is a very good response. And I think by and large, that is accurate. I've seen data that intimates that the church would be the most trusted institution. I think this particular poll had different responses for different countries, so we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, Amanda has got her family from Cuba, and so I see those are going to roll in. So awesome. So thank you for your participation in the poll. We're going to get into the data right now. So I can share my screen, and let's see if this actually works. Because
It wouldn't be Zoom if there wasn't some sort of technical.
I know. So let's see. I'm looking for my toolbar, Michelle, that escaped me.
Well, right now it should all just be together with the Zoom.
Okay. Oh, yes. Perfect. Okay. Just give me one moment.
Absolutely. And again, just a reminder, as questions come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. So Chantal, what we have right now is the full
Yeah.
PowerPoint. Yeah, I don't know if you just want to go into presentation
Yep.
mode. Feel free to drop them in the chat, or I know you know how. I know you know how to raise your hands. Just go ahead and raise your hands, or give us some indication that you'd like to speak out, and we'll gladly hear your question out in the room. All right, Chantal, go ahead.
Okay. All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you the findings of the Pulse for Democracy from 2023 America's Barometer. Now, you guys are kind of getting a preview because this officially will be launched on November 29th by Vanderbilt University in partnership with the Inter-American Dialogue here in Washington, D.C. And I think it will also be hybrid. And so I'm happy to share the link with you, Michelle, so that we can get some FIU participation. So what I'm sharing now are some slides that are kind of like a preview. But just to familiarize you with what is the America's Barometer, it is a survey that is the most scientifically rigorous comparative survey in the region. And this is not to be confused with the Latino Barometro. So if you read The Economist, or there are other public opinion surveys that are conducted in the region, and that's a very excellent survey as well. But we support the America's Barometer, which has been our partner for many years. It's a nationally representative sample that is conducted, that's stratified by region and rural and urban residents. The Vanderbilt University conducts face-to-face phone interviews in 8 languages. Face-to-face and phone interviews. I think the phone interviews only take place in Haiti and in Nicaragua, which are very difficult operating environments. And it asks the same question every 2 years. And then it asks specialized questions as kind of like a corollary to those core questions. So the main topics focus on democracy, the rule of law, the state capacity, trust in institutions, the economy, and corruption. So as you see on the bottom of the slide, the project is made possible through USAID, through our what is called the DIMS 3 mechanism. Okay, so I mentioned this. Okay, so I wanted to share this with you. Following significant declines, views about democracy have remained stable at a new lower equilibrium. So I think what that means is that as compared to 2004, over time, the percentage of folks who, folks still believe in democracy, but that number has gone down. And so, but it's still preferable to any other form of government. And I think that we can all kind of like feel that. Like I think on social media and in like when we see what's going on with all the conflicts around the world today, people are starting to question that. And so I think that that's quite palpable. Um, and then going further to our trust question that I was asking you about, democracy, the question that was put to Latin American survey respondents was, democracy may have problems, but it is better than any other form of government. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? And I think more individuals support democracy for sure and feel that building trustworthy institutions is critical. So here, going to our survey, it looks like by and large, according to this survey, and this wasn't in my poll that I asked about, but it looks like most Latin Americans still trust the armed forces as like the most trusted institution. Does that come as a shock to anyone? Right? We have a lot of security issues in the region, a lot of citizen security, a lot of degradation of citizen security in places that never really had a lot of violence and citizen security, like Ecuador, for example. So while the armed forces are very much so still the trusted institution, the Catholic Church, Evangelical Church, you all were right on the money. They are still the most, if one aside from the armed forces, the most trusted institution. This also, just to share with you as kind of an aside, this is also very much so for migrants that are crossing the border, and a lot of times the only services that they can access are provided by faith-based organizations.
So before
So any reactions? Oh yes, go ahead,
yeah,
Michelle.
before we move too far away from the survey, there's a question in the chat. So you mentioned that there's 8 languages that include Spanish, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, Quechua, maybe French. And then the question is, are the overseas French territories also considered when you're doing that kind of outreach as an institution?
Oh yes, are you referring to like Martinique? Is that the question?
So the overseas French territories, yeah, I have to imagine that they're talking about like in the Caribbean or in northern South America, the former colonized spaces, right?
I know that Haiti is included.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm not quite sure if the surveys extend into Martinique. I can find out and let you know, but definitely Haiti.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I also think it's very noteworthy that the legislature is among like the lowest in this on this slide, and so it's kind of indicative of what we're seeing today. I would say even in the States, right? Even in our own country. And I know the survey doesn't cover that, but yeah, I just wonder for those of you who are tracking or following this in the news. I mean, any reflections on this before I move on? Okay, if not, I'll move on, but we can always go back to it. So one of the things that that the data reveals, because again, this is just a very broad overview. I didn't want to like pull up data sets and like put you all to sleep. But one of the things that we found, and something that Vanderbilt really has highlighted for us, is that there are really 2 pathways to building institutional trust. I don't think they're the only pathways, but they're sort of like the 2 prevailing ones. So one is, through good governance. And what does that mean? It means like leaders, whether at the national, subnational, municipal level, are actually providing services that citizens need. That's on the one end. And then on the other end, there's populism. So there's many definitions. I don't want to get too technical, but at its essence, I think populism is sort of telling people things that they want to hear. Like, I'm helping you. I've helped your neighbor over there. But then when you look for the proof and the evidence, you, you don't see it and you're not experiencing it. So there's populism, right? That we know of the Peronism in Argentina, right? And so in the LAC Bureau here, we're constantly scratching our heads and thinking, how can we support good governance and actually help leaders and our partners deliver on the promise of democracy? And so we always are mindful of this difference between like proof, like where is the actual service delivery, and versus like, what leaders are telling their people. And I think, again, this is not just in Latin America, it's all over the world, including in the US. I'm just trying to be objective, because when we think critically about what's going on, even here in the US, there's populism everywhere. So I thought this was a very interesting concept about trust. Let's see. So I don't want to belabor the point. I think that trust in the courts. Oh, okay. The thing with this slide is very interesting when we think about, because something we ask is, do you ask the survey respondents what do they think is democracy? In fact, that's an interesting question for you all. What do you think is democracy? The definition. Any takers? This is a safe space. You can feel free to. We can riff off of each other.
Feel free to drop some responses in the chat and I'll read them aloud. Or if
Yeah.
you want to speak aloud, highly encouraged, just go ahead and raise your hand
Yeah.
and we'll call on you.
Yeah. No dumb answers.
But to your point, while students are drafting their responses in the chat, what is democracy, and then the differences between the representative democracy and the different ways that we kind of see that is always a funny conversation across political spectrum, right?
Yes, it's also
Also,
very confusing. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Natalia.
no, I just wanted to add what what Vishal was saying, that also it's a big difference how in some countries they say there is democracy. Like, I'm from Hungary. We're supposed to have democracy, but like it's not really democratic anymore. It's just from the outside. And then people don't really have a voice or a choice.
Yes.
Another student response in the chat. It's my understanding that a true democracy is where each individual gets their own voice and vote.
So direct democracy.
Direct democracy.
Yes.
Right?
Very
How
interesting.
to vote.
Yes. That's very interesting. Further to what Natalia was saying, this slide is very interesting because if you notice, this one talks about trust in the high court is high in Costa Rica, Uruguay, as well as El Salvador and Mexico. If you look at the bars all the way to the left of the screen, El Salvador has the highest 63%. So what I asked Vanderbilt was, well, why? Why is El Salvador in the same world as Uruguay because people who are following this, and I don't know as you guys have seen in the news with the gang members that are all lined up in the prisons, and Bukele was voted in. It's a democracy, right? But are the democratic institutions intact? I don't know. According to these respondents, court is trustworthy. The justice system is trustworthy. We're locking people up and we're safe now. So the proof is that we're safe. So what does democracy mean and what does it mean to people is a very provocative question, because I think therein, because I agree with the one person who put this definition that, your voice is heard. So then what does that mean about democratic institutions and how do we measure it? So I don't think there's any right answer. It's very provocative. Okay, moving on. Okay, elections, trust in elections is high. This again is very interesting. So I think if people see that there are results, then they also trust the elections. So in Uruguay, in El Salvador, in Costa Rica, I think Mexico is sort of also in that cohort. Well, Mexico kind of falls below 46%, but we see that, you know, there is trust in elections, but by and large, there's a lot of distrust in elections as well. So it's a mixed bag for sure in Latin America. Okay, on this next slide, you guys can all see my screen, right? Okay, great. So here I wanted to point out that concerns, according to the respondents, concerns about free speech have increased among government critics in many countries. And I think what is most noteworthy is not only Nicaragua and El Salvador at the top, where you see the dots in green are from 2016, and then the dots in purple are 2023, where you see that increase from 75% and 70% respectively, going up to 90 and 89. But then what's almost like very concerning is then if you look down to the bottom and you see Chile and Argentina, it also increases. There's a huge gap there. So it's like you can kind of think about it as if you think of like the countries in the region along a continuum where you have like stronger democratic institutions in Chile and Costa Rica and Uruguay, but that freedom of free, and then you know on the other end of the spectrum or continuum, if you will, you have the Venezuelas and Nicaraguas. But still, in these countries, we see this concerns about free speech. Why do you guys think that is? I mean, or have you seen that? I'm curious to know your feedback.
Can you repeat the question while students are
Sure.
drafting it
I'm
out?
just curious to know. Um, I know we all spend a lot of time on social media, and I don't mean to make this a leading question, but maybe it is. No, but you know, do you have concerns about free speech? And I'm kind of asking many questions. I'm sorry. I didn't, you know, this question just occurred to me, but I'm interested in any reflections you have about concerns about free speech, you know.
Or stories you'd like to share?
Yeah.
I know that in general, and again, as students are typing out and hopefully throwing some responses into the chat, in the university, right, there's spaces like this, like Tuesday Times Roundtable, where students can share their perspectives and engage in discussion in that way. But I think to your point about social media and outward discussions as well, that's definitely something to think of. So we've got a couple of responses in the chat. One student says, well, definitely in Cuba, free speech doesn't exist. You'd be thrown in prison or tortured, right, to talk about the region. Another response is, I think it's because of communism. Interesting take here. Nicaragua is one of those countries and their democracy is laughable. That's a good question, and I don't know if you have a response to that. The idea of economic systems and political systems and trust in institutions, whether they kind of align or clash into each other. Another one in the chat, I wonder if platforms like TikTok have also brought more awareness of free speech in general, which could influence the perspective. Very, very good point from Connie.
Yes, it is. So yeah, I totally appreciate those views about in Cuba. And it's interesting how in really closed where civic space is very closed, like in places like Cuba and in Nicaragua, it affects sort of people start to self-censor themselves because of fear and so where it's been like that for decades, you can see it in the culture, you know. And then but in places that were open where free speech is starting to close, it's super confusing and alarming. And I think with social media, in other words, with the other comment that was made, I really like what one person said about in TikTok. On the one hand, I feel like it's opened up some people's minds and some people's awareness of like, wow, I have a platform here. I can speak my mind. I can share. I can share with others. I can reach out and like, you know, associate myself with others who are not even in the same room as me or in the same city. And yet at the same time, there's also a lot of disinformation that's floating around and a lot of people that are being like canceled because of what they think. And it's almost created this backlash where like some people are then afraid to say anything because they don't want to be canceled.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's super concerning. And we were just talking with some experts this morning from Peru, where like members of Congress or like leaders are going out and saying things and then canceling other members because the person said that they think, freedom, like, so, just absurdities, So it's very controversial. But I really like what you all are sharing.
There's a student that I think is echoing the exact point that you're making. This person says, sometimes I feel like people take freedom of speech too far, as if it gives them the right to say whatever they want without a filter, which is not always good. So to your point of disinformation and different kinds of speech that may or may not be protected.
Exactly. Or just saying lies, right? Just kind of sputtering out like lies. And so some people have referred to like what was formerly Twitter, which is now X. They're saying, oh, this is like a trash can of, or a dumpster fire of like a bunch of different things that are not based in facts. But it's like, well, but do we shut them down?
Yeah.
I guess.
There's another 2 student comments that I think also align with what you're saying here. So one student says, when power is taken away from people and they only take care of those close to the political power. And this person says this from the positionality of their parents having left Nicaragua in the 80s. Right. So this is And then kind of, I think on the same vein, another student says, that social media has helped with the free speech, and but governments can also use how we depend on social media to silence people, like during some protests in July where governments were shutting down internet and electricity to stop people from being able to collaborate through social media.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're all seeing this and living it, and you're totally right. I mean, this is existing and it's out there, and it really impacts not only what we think, but our behavior then too, which is really spooky and like very concerning. So I'm glad that you're all kind of observing this and seeing it and analyzing it on your own.
One
yes,
more
please.
that it's funny to me as I'm reading them because they're coming in direct message to me. But you're saying things that then immediately echo something that somebody already said. It's kind of funny.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So we're all on the same train of thought here. That sometimes in society one doesn't have like this quote unquote free speech because everyone nowadays gets offended at almost every comment, and people are getting canceled for things that, like, I guess may or may not include intentionality, right? So that self-censorship piece that you were talking about.
Yes. Or even like apologetic. Like, I'm sorry for having an opinion. It's like, yeah, it's so problematic, And also, well, I could say more about that, but it's okay. I don't want to start to get on a soapbox. Let me stay focused on these slides. Okay. We asked about bribery. Here, I think, what do I want to say about this one? Yes, in the last 12 months, did any government employee ask you for a bribe? And so it was very interesting on this point about corruption. Those who have been solicited for a bribe in the courts are less than half as likely to trust the high court. So there's this idea of like direct experience and then what you think of it and what you make of it. So I think that it's very telling, and this data kind of helps inform our programming. USAID has actually launched recently a new anti-corruption policy. And we are trying to then, with that policy, use it, frankly, as an advocacy tool to go to the US Congress, to advocate for additional foreign assistance funding so that we can support anti-corruption activities all over the Latin American Caribbean region, because as you all know, this is an important topic for our hemisphere, including the US and Canada. So, we are, again, this data is very important to us to help us, make priorities. in our programming. Let me
Can I
skip
have a question?
to, yes, adelante, please,
Um,
Natalia.
So do you think that these like results in the survey are affected by the government, like media, like they own the media, I'm assuming in most of these countries, like the propaganda they put out? Do you think that has any effect on it?
Is your question, does the media have an impact
No,
on,
no, like the
oh,
government propaganda, like because they can make people believe, like, for example, in any country, the propaganda is like they find an evil who they are protecting the people from, whether it's immigrants or I don't know, someone is always the bad. It's never the government. And then, you know, for example, in my country, old people just watch the government news and they think, oh, this is great, we are being protected, and then they're more likely to vote positive on these surveys. So that's my question, you know, like how do they get the information? Is there propaganda out there what affects their
yes, absolutely. I'm sure it impacts the responses, particularly the propaganda that is saying not just anti-American, but there's just propaganda out there that may call into question whether elections are rigged or whether the courts are useful or not, or, you know, in some countries there's a lot of polarization between the executive and the Congress, for example. And so yes, totally. So yeah, we have no control over that, but what we do have control over is the quality of the questions and also the calculations. But yeah, I take your point that propaganda in each country can definitely exert influence over people's responses.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's another comment in the chat that it's similar to the situation in Cuba, that the news only shows people, like it is controlled by the government and shows people only what they want to hear, right? And then that's the only thing that they know or think to see. Yeah.
Yes. It's especially in places with tightly controlled, if not completely controlled, media that are the most difficult in which to support independent thinkers and independent, media. Yeah. And I think that, there are opportunities to support them. It's just so hard, So let's see. But thank you for raising that. It's for sure. It's definitely a reality. One thing I wanted to point out as well is this issue of food insecurity. And it's something that I think in the past we didn't really pay attention to, in terms of like, what does food insecurity have to do with democracy? But I think people, I know that we had one participant earlier who was saying that like a true democracy is where you can, voice your opinion or voice um, your, your opinion. But I think to offer an additional definition or to add to it is that it's a place where you trust that your government is going to come through for you to provide, if not directly, but at least the environment, right? Like this is an environment where grocery stores can actually sell quality food and I can go there and I have money in my pocket to be able to buy it. But for example, in places like we see Haiti, where as compared from 2012 to 2023 has just declined so dramatically. It is heartbreaking. And, USAID and other organizations and donors that provide humanitarian assistance are always, providing support. But it's like we are like a drop in the bucket when it comes to the actual needs. It's a whole country with cities and towns and, various demographics with need. And so just to see this gap, and therefore the trust in democratic institutions goes down. They say, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. Why would I believe in democracy if, why would I believe in the courts? Why would I believe in the executive? They can't do anything for us. We can't even eat. And then there was another, I think Nicaragua, Honduras was another example where like food insecurity wasn't as like a huge concern in 2012. And now it's significantly grown. So I thought I'd mention that because that's kind of interesting. Okay, I think that there's a section on immigration and then trust with China and Russia, but I kind of wanted to stop there and just also offer an opportunity to see with the remaining time that we have, if you have any questions or if you wanted to open up a discussion about anything, so that it's not just me like telling you about this data. Because I think we have until 1:30, right, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. So just because I think students are more comfortable responding into the chat, we'll have to give them a little bit of a buffer to type out their questions. But yeah,
Okay.
any questions that you'd like to ask directly to Chantal, now's a really great time.
Yeah, either about democracy or the presentation or about our work as well. Yeah, because one thing I did want to do is also share with you a couple of links, and that might take me a minute or two. So while you're putting those into the chat, let's see if I can, let's see.
While you do, I'll just give some general context. I know that FIU has very recently signed a memorandum of understanding and MOU with USAID in the last year and a half-ish. So if you're interested in this kind of work and engaging in these kinds of things, I know that SIPA does a lot of events with USAID, and there are tons of internships and engagement opportunities that you can get in on as a student at FIU. And that because of that memorandum of understanding with USAID, that things are almost designated for FIU students to engage with USAID, right? And that's something that they have with partners they have all over the world and the country. So if you were more interested as a student to get directly involved, there are channels for you to do that at the university. One of them is through us, right? The Office of Global Learning Initiatives. By all means, reach out. But there are a ton, so they're accessible to you. So Chantal, I see you throwing some of those in the chat right now. Do you want to give us any context for any of them?
Yes. So these links Molly shared with me, and the first one I think let's see. Sorry, I just lost my screen.
Yes. It's the hacu.net.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to grab this so I can see what I'm looking at. Yes, it's the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities website. That is one channel to be able to engage with USAID. And then the second one is a flyer for young professionals. It's a hiring pathway for young professionals into USAID. So just in case folks are interested, you know, this isn't necessarily a recruitment conversation, but a lot of times when we do talk to students, students are interested in that. So I just thought before I forget, or before we run out of time, I just thought I'd share that at the get-go. But just wondered, were there any I would actually like to know about like your work of the students, you know, what any papers that you're working on or research that you might be working on that you wanted to share.
This is a great opportunity to get some quotes for a paper that nobody else would have, huh? Yeah, those questions are absolutely welcome, either in the chat or out loud. Feel free to give yourself a little hand raise. So there's a question in the chat that is being prefaced as possibly being controversial.
Okay.
So this person says they want to begin by saying this is not accusatory, but they want to get a better understanding of the views and the institution of USAID as an actor within those communities and in foreign policy. If it has historically contributed to, directly or indirectly, right, any destabilizations of the countries that we're talking about that you're trying to support through LAC. So any role that gets played institutionally in that very destabilization that we're talking about.
Okay. I guess I just wanted to I kind of want to understand better, what does destabilization mean? But I can address, I think it's always important to think about, like, first of all, intent, and then impact, and then any unintentional results. And sometimes, I think that USAID is studying that all the time. So we're conducting constantly assessments or evaluations of our projects and what the impact is. And so I can just say that, since USAID has like kind of works with like a two-pronged objective. One is to provide humanitarian, like short-term humanitarian assistance in countries where it's needed or where it's requested, but also um, it provides technical and foreign assistance to our country partners and for longer term international development objectives. And, we work through what's called like these bilateral agreements. And so we're definitely not anywhere where the host country government doesn't want us. So, for example, there are countries where USAID is not present. You could probably guess them, but for example, Bolivia, like we're not in Bolivia, government doesn't want us there, we're not there. So it's definitely not a forced presence. And there's definitely an agreement document that says, we will I forget what it's called. And one of my colleagues are on the line as well. Carrie Mitchell and Jeff Levine are from my team, but they're basically agreement documents between the countries that agree, like these are the areas where we'll work. And so whether we're supporting economic development or environmental conservation, or, elections monitoring, they know we're there, they agree to us being there, and many times welcome us in those areas. Sometimes it might be annoying or, but I think it's always welcome, and agreed to.
And it sounds like it's probably a good lead into this next section of the slide that you have open here, which is attitudes towards the US, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know if,
Yeah.
There's
I did want to
one
say
more
something about, go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, just to finish the thought, I think that sometimes there might be unintended consequences or outcomes to our work. And let me think about an example of that. I hadn't prepared for that question, but I know there are several. And but I'll think about that and get back to you. But it's always important to think about this. So yeah, it's not, I wouldn't consider it controversial. I think it's always important to question sort of, what are you doing there and why? How do you know that what you're doing there is wanted? And it's definitely not going to be wanted by all, for sure. What was the next question?
Another one that would have been impossible for you to prepare for. So I'm sorry. If you haven't
okay.
seen the movie that they're referencing, then it may not, but we can circle back to it. There's a movie called Argentina 1985, and it presents a perspective on the Argentinian democracy post-Vedilla. Have you seen? I have not heard of this. I haven't seen this. Is this something that's crossed your radar?
Oh my God. Don't tell my mother-in-law, but I have not seen it. My husband is from Argentina. 1985, is it called?
That's what the student said. I haven't heard of
Okay.
this. Argentina 1985.
Is it about La Guerra Sucia? The dirty war in Argentina?
This is
'Cause
a question that we'll wait for a response for in the chat.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's complex, but thank you for flagging the film. I have not seen it, but now I will. Maybe my
It's
team and
about
I
the
can see it
trials
together.
post-Vedilla.
Okay. No, I have not. But was there a comment or something, an observation that you wanted to share?
They wanted to ask what your opinions were, your thoughts were on the movie and the perspective that it shows of Argentinian democracy and trust in those court systems. Somebody else is throwing in the chat another movie
Wow.
recommendation if we're into it. The Lost City is also a good one, apparently.
Oh my gosh, I love
by
that.
all means, we can do this. We've got just under 10 minutes left, so 100%. If we want to throw movie or book recommendations in the chat, that could 100% be something that we share out.
Yeah.
For everyone.
There's also one by called Azúcar Amargo by León Ichazo, which is about Cuba and sort of the state, like what young people, it's about like a young couple and like they're in love and they're, starting out in their lives. but it's like, what does this place offer me? Like, I want to make something of my life, and like, what can I do here? And so it talks about these very core issues about like, you know, there's so many good quotes from that movie. Like, how can I stay here in Cuba when the only thing I see in front of me is a long line? You know, anyhow, but yes, and thank you for the recommendations. I got weekend plans.
I'll throw one in there for myself too. There's one called Y la lluvia también, or even the rain in the English translation. That's fantastic. Same thing, right? If the government controls all that you can do, they even control whether or not you can gather water, right? Even the
Wow.
that is
Oh, I get it. It's like, y la lluvia
Y
también.
la lluvia también.
Wow, wow, wow. That is,
That's a good one.
wow. That's amazing. This is awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Why don't I cover some of this data about attitudes, and then we can wrap up.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. So here, the question to the survey respondents was, the government of China, Russia, and the United States, in your opinion, is this country very trustworthy, somewhat trustworthy, not very trustworthy, not at all trustworthy, or do you not have an opinion? And as you can see on the slide, so the general takeaway at the top is that citizens of the LAC region tend to trust the US government more than its Chinese and Russian counterparts. So you can see that with the lines. Purple is who trusts the US government. Green is who trusts the Chinese government. You can see it changes over time. And then who trusts the Russian government, which is in blue at the bottom. So this is very interesting. And I think what's noteworthy is the change over time. And so we can get to that, I think, in the next one. This one is just fascinating. And I think we spent a lot of time on this slide. So here, when we talk about the government of China and the United States, so I want to present this slide, but then I want to go back to the colleague who was talking about, well, what about the United States influence in the region? So here we have the more trust the US government than the Chinese government, except in Mexico, Peru, Uruguay, Haiti, Bolivia, and Argentina. That's like a lot of accepts. And what the researchers explained to us is that in the when they took the survey some 5 years ago, even, the only country that was in the red was Haiti. And that since then, look at Mexico, -10, Peru, Bolivia. So some of these are not as like a big surprise. For example, Peru. I was talking with a colleague who was visiting from Lima recently, and I told him, I said, what are we going to do? Forgive me, I'm being very open with you. I'm sharing you kind of my thoughts. I said, what are we going to do? The PRC, the Chinese influence is increasing in Latin America and the Caribbean. And he looked at me like, of course, but he's like, but China, don't forget, China and Peru has always been there. We are of Chinese ascendencia. So, but here, sorry, I'm sharing that little, it's important to remember history as well. But then when we look at these data and we see that the trust is growing, it begs the question of why. And, the US government is saying, oh, why? Well, one, it can be many reasons, and I'm sure you all have answers to that. But I thought this slide was very interesting. And it just shows us many things. One is that, the trust in the US is not something we can take for granted. It's not absolute. Because I think because of the US's influence in the region for so long, some of which is not necessarily a good influence, as I think, was mentioned earlier or hinted at earlier. We're seeing some of the results of that, but I also think it's because of increased engagement on the part of these other actors. So the geopolitics is changing. in the world, and we're definitely, the data bears that out, you know. So I think this was very interesting for us to learn about, and then we'll hear more of the analysis when they give the actual public presentation on November 29th. Any thoughts or reflections about, you know, other sort of influences, you know, for those of you who are using social media? There's like Telegram that's out there. There is well, of course there's TikTok, but there's a news outlet, a Russian news outlet called RT, that is very increasing its presence in Latin America and the Caribbean. You know, of course, a lot of news is shared through WhatsApp, and in countries like Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua, it's boomeranged. You know, somebody's in Venezuela, they send it to their family member in Spain, it comes back, things like this. But
So
these
looks like we have
platforms, oh, see, go ahead.
either a question or a comment from Gitanjali. Go ahead.
Hi, yes, I was wondering, is there a reason why Barbados was not included in this survey? Because I see Trinidad and Tobago and Dominican Republic and the Bahamas as well. And I was wondering that because Barbados is very much influenced by the US government in many ways as well, and they do view the US government, in high regard, compared to the Chinese government, per my personal experience. I don't really know how truly it is. That's why I was surprised to see that Barbados wasn't there.
Yes, Gitanjali, that's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. In fact, I think in our presentation, when we first saw this, somebody in one of our colleagues raised their hand and said, "Why is Bahamas up there?" It's like the first one. But you're right. Barbados is part of the sampling, and I don't know the answer to your question, but I can find out and let you know, because you're totally right. It it definitely is part of the sampling, but it's not here. So that's super interesting.
But to a point that was raised earlier, I guess that's students, or that we in general are asking the kinds of questions of what is there, what's not there, what are we asking and what are we not asking, and let's pay attention to both, right? I think is fantastic, and I love to see it. But it is 1:29, so Chantal, I don't know if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to wrap us up with before we close off.
Oh, just to thank you so much for your time and your interest and your questions and engagement, and just to keep up the great work. You know, it's so what you're doing is so inspiring, all your studies and research. So keep it up, and hope we can talk again in the future.
Absolutely, we'll figure out more ways to get USAID back here. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And participants, that is a wrap on our fall 2023 series. This was our last TTR session for the semester. We will be back in the spring, but if you can take 2 minutes to give us some feedback on what kinds of presentations you want to see in the future, this QR code will take you to something that asks you about topics that you're interested, or kinds of speakers or community partners that you're interested. So we appreciate any feedback that you can give us. Chantal, again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a wonderful end to the fall semester.